Okay, so we'll kick this video off with an article published on Sportsnet the other day by Mark Spector. Now, this is just the introductory piece to a bigger conversation I wanted to have about the Edmonton Oilers and the Ottawa Senators, but we're going over a name pretty much that has had conversations like this arise about him in the past. It is indeed 4th overall pick, 2016, big Finnish winger, Jesse Puljujarvi. Because if you go over to this article on Sportsnet, it appears that Puljujarvi, once again, wants out, and the Oilers are ready to accommodate with a trade. This is the opening paragraph on the entire thing here. Puljujarvi and the Oilers are ready for a divorce. That's a strong word right there. Oh boy. As he was 3 seasons ago, Puljujarvi is ready to move on for a fresh start elsewhere, sources have confirmed. The Oilers are ready to oblige and are speaking with at least 4 teams in an attempt to push the return as high as possible. Puljujarvi's agent, Marcus Leto, declined to comment on the entire article, but he did not dispute the above characterization of his 24-year-old client. Oilers GM Ken Holland, who is actively working the phones on a number of players, including Puljujarvi, Barry Fogle, and Zach Kassian, did not return a request for an interview, which is rare. Now, before we move on, I just wanted to go over the profile here. Just go over Puljujarvi and refresh those who are not in the know. 24 years old, 6'4", 201 is a right-handed guy, and he is a current RFA who needs a new deal. Now, whether or not he's going to get that new deal in Edmonton or in some other team, that remains to be seen, but Puljujarvi this previous season had 36 points in 65 games played. Now, you do the math on just this number alone, 36 divvy 65 multiplied out by 82, that's a 45-point pace over a full season, which definitely is not bad, especially for a guy like Puljujarvi, whom most people believe is a middle six-ish caliber forward. It's just in the playoffs, the guy had 3 points in 16 games played, and he really did not showcase all too well. You had a lot of other players stepping up big time, like Evander Kane, like Zach Hyman. You had Yamamoto showing up there, Nugent Hopkins, and then of course McDavid and Draisaitl. These guys were all pretty great, but Puljujarvi was not on that same boat. Now, if you take a look at where Puljujarvi is today and where he has been in the past, it's easier to come to a conclusion as to why Mark Spector is writing about Puljujarvi in a way that says that for the second time in a few years, he does indeed want to leave. Puljujarvi went back home to Finland after the entire thing that happened a few years ago, while Holland waited for a first-round pick in a trade that never emerged. So when Puljujarvi was brought back to middling success, the GM was indeed praised for his patient handling of the asset. 3 years later, though, that patience has run out, on both sides. Puljujarvi is deemed a play killer inside the Oilers dressing room, it is believed, where 2 of the best centermen in the world have not been enough to turn him into a legitimate top 6 winger at the NHL level. The puck dies on his stick in the offensive zone too often to continue to saddle Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl with such a winger on a regular basis. Now, Puljujarvi does have incredible advanced analytics. He drives play very well, he does a lot of good things on the boards, defensively, etc. He does very positive things out there on the ice when it comes to an on-ice shot-goal differential perspective, but the rock-hard point numbers are not as solidified there. Furthermore, you acknowledge that Puljujarvi does not really go out there and produce as much as he should individually, and all of a sudden it's easier to see why this identity for him in the locker room has apparently been built up, where he is deemed a play killer, whom McDavid and Draisaitl could not actually turn into a legit forward. This article then goes over a pretty interesting conversation saying this: what is Puljujarvi's value on the trade market? He was drafted 4th overall in 2016, but these are the opinions of a few professional scouts that Sportsnet spoke to this week as to how much Puljujarvi could get. Probably more like a 3rd-round pick for me. I think the only way they get a second is if it's a late second, or the team has multiple seconds and can get rid of one for a flyer on him. You should be able to get a second, another scout said. A 3rd scout said Puljujarvi is the equivalent of a 3rd-line player with some upside. A 4th scout said that if you can get a 2nd-round pick, you take it. And so, this is kind of where asset management comes in. Oh, you talk about a guy who is good, he's a young player, etc., etc. You drafted him 4th overall in 2016, and now, 6 years later, the guy might get traded for what is essentially a 2nd or a 3rd. Which is why we go over onto this conversation that was brought up on Insider Trading yesterday as well. Chris Johnston on the TSN program says the trade winds are blowing increasingly stronger when it comes to Puljujarvi. A couple of teams have already engaged in trade talks with the Oilers, and one of them is believed to be the Senators. Puljujarvi is an RFA who needs a new contract. So, now that we've established the context as to what Puljujarvi is going through, his entire situation with the team, how well he is playing, how poorly he's playing, how often the play dies on his stick, etc., etc. Let's go over the Ottawa Senators and how their fan base is responding to this entire idea. The article was posted, or not the article, but the idea was posted onto the Sens subreddit by Joseph Station. TSN's Chris Johnson mentions the Sens have interest in Puljujarvi, notes that sources around the league think the cost would be a second-round pick. The only question is here, though, why not? This is the first comment from Middle Hair on the Sens subreddit. I know he's a polarizing player for some, but I'm all in for this trade. He's 24, and he wouldn't be too expensive to extend. He has great underlying numbers, is great on the forecheck, and is defensively responsible. The only gripe with him is that his finishing is quite poor. He generates a lot of space for his line mates and makes them better, but he doesn't bury his chances as much as you would like. That also is part of the reason why a lot of people would say that even though Draisaitl and McDavid are some of the best players in the entire gosh darn world, they could not turn Puljujarvi into a top 6 player. At worst, you're getting a Brown-type player that can play in your middle 6 for the next few years, especially if Brown is moved this summer to target a top 4D or a top 6 forward. Puljujarvi is an ideal replacement. For a second or third round pick, why not? Also, the Sens are in a position where they have an extra second-round pick this season, acquired from the Tampa Bay Lightning. You also have a secondary third as well that was given to you earlier this year in, I believe it was the Mike Riley trade. Yeah, it's tough to remember that that even happened, isn't it? But either way, Puljujarvi is garnering interest now, apparently, and it does not really appear that the price is going to be all too high. So my question to you here, Ottawa Senators fans, is if you do indeed entertain this discussion and you are interested in this player, what is the most you would be willing to give up? Is it that going price rate of a second or a third round pick? Would you just say, okay, screw it, we'll trade away the second round pick that we got from Tampa Bay? Because if you kind of do all the calculations, why did the Sens even have that pick in the first place? Well, it's because they got it in the Braden Coburn, Cedric Paquette, Marian Gaborik, Anders Nielsen trade, right? So that was pretty much a cap-saving move for the Tampa Bay Lightning where you got some extra players and the pick. If you could realistically turn that trade back in December of 2020 into the trade that ultimately gets you Puljujarvi, that sounds like a pretty good trade from a few years down the line's perspective, right? Furthermore, if you wanted to say, okay, let's say the price is a third-round pick, and you just sent over that Boston Bruins third you have, all of a sudden it pretty much means that by proxy you traded away Mike Riley for Jesse Puljujarvi, who could realistically get 30-40 points next season in your middle 6, and if he really does blossom into what we thought he could be back in 2016, he might be able to get even more. The Ottawa Senators do not have to worry about whatever cap shenanigans are going to go on here because they have $23 million in cap space, and the guys they're going to have to re-sign, aside from Josh Norris, are not really going to be the most expensive in the world. Plus, there still is opportunity to trade away some other players to free up some more cap dollar amounts, so I don't really think the money is something Ottawa should be too concerned about. But for Edmonton, though, talk to me in the comments your thoughts about what you feel this situation has gone through and how you feel like it's going to go down, because with this guy as an RFA, you're going to have to make a move somehow, either re-sign him to a contract that might be seen as a bit too high to keep him around because he wants out, or trade him away for a return that's in the second or third round pick range. I've seen a few Oilers fans saying similar things like, hey, it's really tough to win a Puljujarvi trade right now because the guy's value is at an all-time low. Maybe if you traded this guy at the trade deadline, things would be a bit better because he didn't have that bad playoff showcase yet. Now he has that reputation out in the public that he is a play killer, and that is very bad, honestly, when you're talking about negotiations. Oh, why should we give you this first round pick or this prospect? This player, the play dies on his stick. Like, you cannot be asking for that much, Ken Holland. I'm sorry. It's really easy for NHL GMs to go out there and say something like that to dissuade the idea of getting a little bit more for this player. Maybe if you're insecure about Connor Brown on Ottawa, maybe you trade away Connor Brown for Puljujarvi. I don't really know if that's something the Ottawa Senators would really want to pay attention to, but if it is, I mean, Connor Brown's a player that was on the Connor McDavid-led Erie Otter squad, and they had some pretty good chemistry, so I think that actually would be a pretty good fit, all things considered, but I know a lot of Sens fans do love Connor Brown. I was just kind of throwing that name out there because there was some insecurity as to whether or not he's going to stick around long-term anyway, but either way, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this Puljujarvi thing here, but I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.